This is the John Oakley Show on 640 Toronto.
And I won't back down.
Hey, good afternoon. Hour 2 already on a glorious day for talk radio. The Friday edition. Weekend beckons. Man, oh man. There's a lot of cleanup and housekeeping to do before I take off for a few well-deserved weeks of rest. But right now, for example, yesterday, it happened late in the afternoon. Didn't have much time to really dig in, but City Council voted 16-9 for these special access areas that would be protected against protesters. That we understand a lot of people have felt very, very intimidated by protesters right in the midst of, whether it's synagogues, schools, daycares, places of worship, businesses, libraries, so on and so forth. So City Council, they were going at it, hammer and tong, all afternoon. And it was late in the day yesterday when this was passed 16-9, but it's not sitting well with everybody. Case in point, our friend Jake Landau, who's a left-wing Liberal organizer, he writes about all the things in Canada that make him exhausted and sad. He's the author of Jake Landau's Getting Tired on Substack. He's not impressed with what went down at council yesterday, and he's here to tell us why that is. Jake, I always appreciate you being on the Oakley Show. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It's a bad day for civil rights, but it's still a great day for talk radio.
Well, there you go. You've encapsulated everything here. But all right, let's get down to the matter at hand, these bubble zones and the bylaw. You claim it's overreach by council or, the people who voted in favor of. Explain yourself.
Yeah, there are a few different problems with this bubble zone bylaw. They call them access areas. But one of the biggest problems is just simply they create a sort of any not just any daycare or school or place of worship, but any building that contains one may request an access area be imposed, blocking protest in a 50-meter range around the building. And one obvious negative consequence of this is that even if a building's primary purpose isn't any of those things, you could have, say, a company doing objectionable stuff, someone like, if we're going to harken back to the last time I was on the show, Therme Canada and their spa, if Therme has an employee daycare, then they could ostensibly file under this measure to block protest outside their building. And that's just one example. But another example of why people may want to protest outside a place of worship is sometimes places of worship do bad things that deserve public scrutiny. Not to be a bit too blunt with it, but I think we're all familiar with what happened with the Catholic Church and sexual abuse of children. It was a widespread phenomenon across multiple continents. And I think that many people are perfectly valid, especially if they were personally affected. What would happen under this new bylaw is if a church official abused a child in a local Toronto church, they could apply for an access area limit around it. And because this motion now makes it finable to discourage people from entering, it would somehow now be illegal to discourage people from entering that church, even though you may have a very good reason to protest outside it. Obviously, this has been brought up by the issue of synagogues and protests outside them, but this will apply to all religions, to all daycares. And on the topic of synagogues specifically, obviously no one should protest outside a synagogue just for holding a Jewish service. I'm a Jew and I don't like that idea very much. But it's different when a synagogue does something like hosting an auction for real estate in West Bank settlements. That's a very political thing that a lot of people have some valid concerns about. So there are a lot of restrictions here that can create a lot of problems for where you can actually legally protest in the city anymore, because by estimates, there's about more than 3,000 buildings which would qualify for an access area if the owner of that property applied.
Again, with Jake Landau, left-wing Liberal organizer, and his Substack is Jake Landau's Getting Tired. He's already tired of the motion that went through City Council 16-9 yesterday with these bubble zones or access zones. But Jake, 50 meters still allows you, that's like 150 feet if you want to do it the old way. You're across the street and you can rail to your heart's content. It's just about denying access to or getting right into somebody's grill, intimidating them and harassing them. Do you not see that as somewhat of a balance? I know Pasternak.
But that's actually not what the text of the motion of the bylaw says. The bylaw simply says discouraging someone from entering, and that is a very, very broad category.
Right. I took that to mean, protesting in their face, discouraging. Okay. And Rachel Chernos-Lynn moved the motion. It passed. But the thing is, again, that 50 meters, because James Pasternak was proposing initially 100 meters. I guess there was a 20-meter kind of a consensus on that. So here we are with 50. Is that still not somewhat of a compromise? Because you just intimated the impetus for this might just be, two dead Jewish embassy workers in Washington. You're a Jew yourself, as you said. Is there not a palpable sense within the community that, there are some loopy folks out there taking liberties with Jews?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that I don't think any bubble zone bylaw is going to stop a mass shooter with a gun. I think if they've got it in their head that they're going to target Jewish people and they're going to kill them, I don't think a municipal bylaw with a fine is going to be what's going to stop them. That's already violating a lot of criminal laws. And that's the thing. We already have a lot of criminal tools to target things like assault and mischief without blanket banning protest within a large range of a building. Again, the fact that there are so many buildings across the city which could qualify for this could create a patchwork network where, when I say effectively banning protest in my piece across the entire city, it's the idea that, of course, most building owners would want to ban protest outside their building for the sake of convenience. That's not necessarily good for society because a lot of the time you may have good reasons to protest, but it's bad to give a tool that can essentially, across, again, more than 3,000 buildings across the city, create entire swaths of the city where there's very little area to actually publicly demonstrate under the charter.
Jake, when you just said that there are already laws on the books, that against harassment, intimidation, and hate, and so on and so forth, effectively what you're saying indirectly is that the police have not done a good enough job of protecting people against these kinds of indignities and, being accosted this way.
That's correct. I think that a lot of the time police do already have tools to solve problems that they simply are not. And I think Mayor Chow and the city should ask ourselves, we've given the city the city has given the police exactly the budget increase they asked for. It wasn't that there was a mismatch in the dollars. Repeatedly, the Toronto police get the money that they ask from the city. So if they already have the tools and they already have the money, then it is valid to ask them, why can't they manage things appropriately? And again, I will say not all Palestinian protests, or even most Palestinian protests, are violent or in this way. There are occasionally members of those protests who do break the law, and they should be addressed accordingly. But again, I'm Jewish. I also think that I look at what's happening in Gaza right now, and it's a very, very sad humanitarian situation. And I don't think people are wrong per se to protest on behalf of those people. Of course, everything needs to be done peacefully and safely, and that's where the balance needs to be struck here. And if that brings us back to our bubble zone bylaw discussion and protests outside synagogues, again, you shouldn't protest outside a synagogue for conducting religious services, but when they do something like auctioning land in a West Bank settlement, or when they do something like hosting a soldier from the Israeli military to give talks, that becomes naturally political, and people will protest those political things with politics of their own.
Yeah, we've seen these restriction zones implemented before because there's one woman whose name I can't recall, but she's in her 60s. She's done some serious time in the brig because she's protested outside abortion clinics. There was a restraining order effectively placed upon her. But nonetheless, I don't want to digress, because to get back to what you're protesting against here, the restriction on protesting, you allude to the fact, because this does seem like it might just be playing fast and loose with certain charter protections. Do you think this would stand up in court if somebody wanted to make a charter challenge?
I don't think it would. And again, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not the one putting my money on the line in a lawsuit. But this really just doesn't seem to cover the most basic Section 1 test of reasonable limits. There's a requirement that if you're going to infringe on charter rights, you have to do it in the most narrowly tailored way possible. And also, unlike the province and the federal government, the city both can't invoke the notwithstanding clause and thus obviously hasn't here. So if it isn't deemed a reasonable limit, then the Supreme Court may very well throw it out.
At the end of it all, you say what this really is all about is not, confronting bigotry or any kind of hate or harassment or so on and so forth. You think there's another agenda at play.
Right. I think ultimately it is about limiting protests that people find uncomfortable. And there is a difference between being uncomfortable and unsafe. Protests are naturally disruptive. Protests naturally may expose you to things that disrupt the way you think about the world, and that may sometimes make you uncomfortable. Again, that doesn't mean everything a protest does is okay or appropriate, but part of a charter-given right to protest and to freedom of expression is that not everybody will always like what a protest says. I know I don't always like what they say, but they do have a right to say it.
We'll leave on that note, and I appreciate your weighing in on his Substack. Jake writes that protesting is now effectively illegal in Toronto. We'll get a response to that. Jake Landau, again, is a left-wing liberal organizer who writes about all things in Canada that make him exhausted and sad. Are you exhausted and sad over this one?
A little bit.
Okay. Just wanted to check. All right, we'll let you go till next time, Jake. I appreciate you weighing in and
thanks for having me, John.
Unfolding the issue.